Number 1.
Robin was last seen on the Chain of Rocks Bridge in St. Louis, Missouri at 11:25 p.m. on April 5, 1991. The bridge spans the Mississippi River at the Missouri-Illinois state line. Robin and her 20-year-old sister, Julie Ann Kerry, had taken a visiting 19-year-old cousin from Maryland, Thomas Cummins, to the bridge to show him a graffiti poem they had painted there several years earlier. A photograph of Julie is posted with this case summary. Several hours later, Thomas contacted police and told them 4 men had attacked him and his cousins, robbed him, raped the women and pushed them off the bridge into the river. Thomas then jumped off the bridge after being ordered to do so by the attackers. He saw Julie in the water, still alive, but they became separated and he never saw her or Robin again. He was able to swim to shore and get help. Julie's body was recovered in Caruthersville, Missouri several weeks later, but Robin's remains were never located. Authorities initially suspected Thomas had been responsible for the Kerry sisters' deaths and that he made up the story about the other men to cover up his own crime. He failed a polygraph shortly after making his initial report. Investigators theorized that Julie had accidentally fallen off the bridge while resisting Thomas's sexual advances, and Robin jumped in to save her, and both of them drowned. Thomas was charged with murdering his cousins, but he was quickly released for lack of evidence, and the investigation turned in another direction. He later won a settlement against the St. Louis Police Department for wrongful interrogation techniques. Marlon Gray, Daniel Winfrey, Reginald Clemens, and Clemens' cousin, Antonio D. Richardson, were subsequently convicted of raping and murdering Robin and Julie and robbing Thomas. His belongings were found in their possession after their arrests. All 4 defendants confessed to the crime, and their stories were consistent with Thomas's version of events, but 3 of them later recanted. Winfrey, who was 15 years old at the time of the murders and the only attacker who did not participate in the rapes, took a plea bargain and was sentenced to 30 years in prison for his testimony against the others. While he was in prison, he wrote a letter to the Kerry family, apologizing for his role in the crimes. He was paroled in 2007 after serving half his sentence, but was subsequently returned to prison for parole violations. The other 3 defendants were sentenced to death. Gray was executed in October 2005. Richardson's sentence was commuted to life in prison in 2005. Clemens spent more than 20 years on death row, then his conviction was overturned after a judge decided his confession was coerced and excluded it from evidence. In December 2017, Clemens admitted his guilt in court and pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder, 2 counts of rape and 1 count of first-degree robbery, and was sentenced to 5 consecutive terms of life in prison. Both Robin and Julie were students at the University of Missouri at St. Louis in 1991. Julie was an English major. Foul play is suspected in Robin's case due to the circumstances involved. Thomas's sister, Janine Cummins, wrote a book about her cousin's murders called A Rip in Heaven.
Number 2.
Kipper drove to St. Joseph, Missouri from her family's residence in Kansas City to pick up a friend during the evening of February 24, 1997. They went ice skating together. The low fuel warning light in Kipper's red 1989 Ford Pro-Bel X activated as she was driving her friend back to St. Joseph at approximately 1 a.m. She refused to stop for a gas fill-up, saying that her car always had good gas mileage and she could return to Kansas City without topping the tank. Kipper's family said that she used her AAA Auto Club membership several times prior to February 1997 after allowing her car to run out of fuel while driving. Kipper dropped her friend off in St. Joseph at approximately 2 a.m. and promised to call him by 3 a.m. to announce her arrival home. Her friend fell asleep while waiting for her call. Kipper's car apparently ran out of fuel shortly after 2:30 a.m. as she drove down Interstate 29 north of the Kansas City International Airport. A truck driver observed a dark-haired Caucasian female flagging down traffic with a concerned look on her face by the southbound shoulder of the highway at approximately 2:34 a.m. The woman fit Kipper's description. The witness told investigators that he saw another vehicle backing up on the exit ramp towards the woman's car as he passed. Kipper has never been seen again. Kipper's mother discovered her daughter's Ford Probe later in the morning on Interstate 29. The hazard lights were on and the vehicle's battery was low. There was no sign of Kipper at the scene. Authorities searched the Kansas City, Missouri residence of John E. Williams later in 1997, when he was implicated in the abduction and sexual assault of another woman. Investigators discovered Kipper's identification cards, paycheck stub, car keys, mock turtleneck and jeans inside Williams' home. DNA tests confirmed that the clothing belonged to Kipper, and investigators believed the damage to the clothing was consistent with a homicide. Williams was questioned about Kipper's case and claimed he accidentally struck and killed her with his vehicle on the night of February 24 on Interstate 29. Williams was a convicted sex offender and told authorities he was afraid of becoming implicated in the crime, so he placed Kipper's body in his car and disposed of her remains. He initially refused to divulge her burial location, but eventually led investigators to the Platte City area. Nothing was discovered during an extensive search. Authorities learned that Williams had his car's windshield repaired the day after Kipper vanished. They believed it was damaged by someone kicking it during a struggle. Williams denied the statement and also denied intentionally killing Kipper. Several witnesses provided tips which placed Kipper's body in the woods of Platte County, but no evidence was located to confirm the reports. Williams was imprisoned for the rape and abduction of the other Missouri woman and was about to be charged with Kipper's homicide when he committed suicide in his cell in April 1999. He died without revealing the location of Kipper's remains. After his death, two of his cellmates corroborated his previous statements, saying he had told them he had killed Kipper and disposed of her body. Kipper had been an exotic dancer in the Kansas City area in 1996, but had decided to leave the industry at the time of her disappearance and had secured employment elsewhere. Her case remains unsolved.
Number 3.
A mother in Branson, Missouri, is desperate to find her son, who has been missing for nearly 5 months. David Koenig, a 25-year-old amateur mixed martial arts fighter, was last seen on February 8, 2020, at the Peachtree Inn on Green Mountain Drive in Branson. David's mother, Tracy Koenig, told us her son is friends with the owner of the Peachtree Inn and had been staying there for a couple of nights. He messaged a few of his friends asking for help, Tracy said. He thought he might be in some sort of trouble. But by the time they read the messages and tried to respond to him, he had stopped messaging. There was no answer from him. That was on February 8. He hasn't been seen or heard from since. Tracy explained that David had lost his phone, so he had recently bought a second-hand one with just Wi-Fi that he used to message his friends and family. He's gone off the grid before, but not like this, Tracy said. And he's 25, so we didn't report him missing for a couple of weeks. But it's not like him to not contact anyone for this long. It's been months. Something is wrong. In March, David's family reported him missing to the Branson Police Department, and a joint investigation was launched with the Missouri State Highway Patrol. Master Sergeant Danielle Heil with the Missouri State Highway Patrol told us that David's disappearance is still an active investigation and they are following all tips and leads that they receive. We've hit dead end after dead end, and it's very frustrating, Sergeant Heil said. But we're still conducting interviews and talking with anyone who may have information that could lead us to David. We're not giving up. Sergeant Heil told us investigators are looking at his disappearance as foul play because of the nature of his Facebook messages on the night he was last seen. He sounded like he was in distress, Sergeant Heil said. And wrote that he may be in trouble. This is a 6'6", 240-pound man. He doesn't just disappear. Tracy told us she's worried that her son got into some sort of trouble or is trying to protect his family by keeping his distance. He's just not someone who would disappear. And he's not a guy that someone could just take down, Tracy said. He's a force to be reckoned with. He's a big, strong guy, but also with a big personality and big heart. He would do anything to protect his family. David, known as Dave or Big D, is the oldest of 3 kids. He is especially close with his 17-year-old sister. They're so alike, they're basically the same person, Tracy said. And he hasn't even messaged her, which is very unusual. She's just devastated by all of this. Tracy said David spent most of his life inside the gym, eventually working his way to success as an amateur MMA fighter on the local circuit. If somebody meets Dave, they don't generally forget him, Tracy said. He's really well known in this community, and everyone is just worried about him. They've been so supportive at this time. Tracy told us tips have been trickling in, both through the police department tip line and through the Facebook group Mystery of the Missing Fighter, but nothing that has led them to finding David. It's just all you think about 24 hours a day. Every day. For months, Tracy said. But you still have to function and go about your life. And that's hard. For us, this has left a huge hole in our lives. Tracy said their family is not giving up hope that he will be found. We just want to know that he's okay, Tracy said. Dave, if you see this, just find a way to come home or let us know that you're okay. A $5,000 reward is being offered by the Koenig family for information that leads to David's whereabouts. David is described as 6'6", weighing 240 pounds with brown hair and brown eyes. He has numerous tattoos, including a scorpion on his right upper arm, the word Omerta on his chest, and the bullpen mafia on his abdomen. Part of his middle finger on his left hand is missing. Anyone with information about David's whereabouts is asked to call the Branson Police Department at 417-334-3300.
Number 4.
Heather was staying with friends of her family, Dana Madden and Christopher Herbert, and babysitting their 2-month-old baby in July 1999. She had been staying in their residence for about a week by July 15. She was at the apartment in the 1600 block of Yale Avenue in Richmond Heights, Missouri during the overnight hours of July 15. Madden was working the night shift, and the Herbert was not at home at the time. A neighbor reported observing an unidentified man carrying a child Heather's age out of the apartment at approximately 2 a.m. that morning. The child's upper body was wrapped in a blanket. When authorities were called to the scene at 5 a.m., they discovered that a white comforter with a floral design was missing from the apartment along with Heather. The baby was in the apartment alone and crying, and there was no sign of Heather, but a small amount of blood was found inside the residence. DNA testing linked the blood to Heather. She has never been heard from again. Authorities announced they believed Heather was not a victim of random violence. They think the attackers most likely knew her family or the friends she was staying with at the time. The investigation centered on a methamphetamine ring in Missouri. Evidence of a methamphetamine manufacturing lab was found in the Madden-Herbert apartment. Investigators said Heather may have witnessed illegal drug activity in the apartment's garage and was abducted and presumably murdered as a result. They have a suspect in her case, but the individual hasn't been publicly identified. Heather's mother, Christine Cullen, had a verbal confrontation with Madden in April 2000, 9 months after her daughter vanished. She was arrested after arguing with Madden during the latter's work shift at a local 7-Eleven convenience store in St. Louis. Christine believes Madden and Herbert know more about her daughter's disappearance than they are telling. Herbert has given conflicting stories about his whereabouts at the time Heather disappeared. Madden was at work when she vanished. Christine has been actively involved in Heather's case since the onset of the investigation and has never been considered a suspect. She says she believes her daughter will come home safe eventually. Foul play is suspected in Heather's disappearance. She was a student at Blow Middle School in South St. Louis, Missouri at the time of her disappearance. Her case remains unsolved.
Number 5.
Jodie was last seen at her boyfriend's house in the 700 block of Cambridge Street in Kansas City, Missouri on May 23, 1985. She had an argument with her boyfriend and other friends on the day of her disappearance. She apparently wanted to accompany them to their destination, but they refused. Jodie walked to a friend's residence near East 14th Street and Winchester Avenue, and, at 10 p.m., she called her mother, Jodie Stratton, and asked for a ride home to the 6800 block of East Topping Street. Stratton did not have her car and Jodie told her she had friends who could give her a ride. When she left her friend's house, her friend assumed she was going back to her boyfriend's. She was last seen walking northbound on Winchester from 14th Street. She was never heard from again. She did not take any money or extra clothing with her when she disappeared. Jodie was enrolled in a juvenile probation program at the time she disappeared. She and a friend had had a run-in with a security guard in 1984, and Jodie had also been in trouble for truancy. After her disappearance, Stratton contacted her caseworker and the caseworker filed 2 warrants, listing Jodie as an endangered juvenile who should be detained by authorities if she was spotted. Stratton assumed that the warrants also meant juvenile authorities had filed a missing child report with law enforcement. They had not. Law enforcement never considered Jodie as a missing person until 1987, 2 years following her disappearance, because they had not been notified. As a result, Jodie's case was obviously extremely delayed, and clues were minimal by the time the investigation began. Jodie's probation officer got a letter about 4 years after Jodie was last seen. The writer claimed to be Jodie and said she was doing well and one day she might say why she decided to leave. Stratton compared the handwriting with a previous letter Jodie had written her probation officer but isn't sure whether or not it's the same writing. In 1993, Stratton got a series of threatening phone calls at her home that lasted 2 years. The callers demanded money in exchange for Jodie's safe return and at one point threatened to send Jodie's body to her in pieces. Stratton started recording the calls and sent them to the police, who traced them to a Kansas City phone booth, but the callers were never identified. In 1997, police dragged the Missouri River after 2 prison inmates claimed they had information on the case. Their tip went nowhere, but it led the Kansas City Police Department to reclassify Jodie's case as a probable homicide. Stratton now lives in Arkansas but visits Kansas City a few times every year to search for her daughter. She stated Jodie's home life in 1985 was dysfunctional and Stratton didn't get along with her father, and she thinks it's possible her daughter deliberately chose to leave. Investigators have also considered that theory, but they think that, whatever the cause of Jodie's disappearance, something might have happened that jeopardized her safety. Jodie's case remains unsolved.
Number 6.
Jennifer was last seen at East High School in Kansas City, Missouri on January 22, 1998. She was a sophomore at the school at the time. She attended her first 2 morning classes, then got into a fight with some other students and left the campus at 9:30 a.m. Jennifer apparently went to a nearby grocery store afterwards, where she met Wesley Ira Perky, a local handyman who had interviewed for a plumbing job in the area that morning. She got into his white 1989 Ford pickup truck and has never been heard from again. Initially, authorities believed Jennifer left of her own accord. She had an unstable home life and she had recently transferred from Ruskin High School and felt unsafe in her new school. However, she was about to take her driver's license test and her family maintained that she would never have run away from home. Eventually her disappearance was reclassified as an abduction. Perky confessed to Jennifer's murder in December 1998 while he was in jail awaiting trial for murdering an elderly woman in her home. He has a long criminal record and was addicted to alcohol and drugs in 1998. He stated he would assist in the investigation if he was transferred from a state prison to a federal prison. He was charged in Jennifer's death in October 2001. Perky stated he had forcibly abducted Jennifer, taken her to his home in Lansing, Kansas, raped her and stabbed her to death. He claimed he dismembered her body and burned it in a fireplace, then dumped what was left in a septic pond. He led investigators to the place where he said he discarded Jennifer's jawbone and her undergarments. Authorities searched several areas for her remains but never found anything. Perky was convicted of Jennifer's murder in 2003. A photo of him is posted with this case summary. During the penalty phase of his trial, he changed his story slightly. He still admitted to killing Jennifer but said he had not abducted her and she had gone to his home willingly. He said he fabricated the kidnapping part of the story because he wanted Jennifer's murder to be considered a federal crime and prosecuted in federal court. Perky apologized to Jennifer's father before his sentence was handed down. He was sentenced to death for the crime and executed by lethal injection in July 2020. His was the first federal execution since 2003. There was a report that Jennifer's remains were found in January 2004, But the report was false, and she is still missing. Foul play is suspected in her case due to the circumstances involved.